Hello, my dear friends, and welcome to Led to Gold, the podcast devoted to discussing all things growth and wellness, and most recently, apparently, taking some people off on Facebook, which I'll get into later. My name is Erin Taylor. I am the host of this show, and if you are here for the first time, welcome. I am so sorry to let you know that this will be the third to last episode of season 1. So if I haven't already made this abundantly clear, even to those who have routinely checked in, listened, whatever, Led to Gold is taking a pretty significant hiatus, at least on the podcast side of things. I am still anticipating checking up with the blog when I feel called to write. It won't be as regular as it has been for the past 2 years, but I'm going to do my best to stick around there. That being said, I have something really excited planned for our season finale, episode 50, which will air in early November. And after that, I don't know, you're not going to hear my voice for a little while unless you follow me on Instagram. So with all of that being said, hi, happy to have you. If you enjoy this episode, maybe you've listened before and you're really liking it, it would mean the absolute world to me if you could take a moment to rate the show wherever you're listening, or share with a friend. It's great to get the show out there a little bit. If you have somebody in your life who you think might benefit from the conversations that we have here, I would love for you to share it. And beyond that, as I just mentioned, if you like what we talk about here, I also have a blog under the same name, Led to Gold. So all the links for all the things are in the show notes. I post right now on the blog every other Monday, and I post here every adjacent Monday. So if you're following along, you're getting something from me every single Monday. And last but not least, if you really, really want to stay up to date, I do have a little monthly newsletter email chain if you subscribe to my stuff. It's cute. It's fun. There's a little Zodiac Tide playlist in there. So if you subscribe, like the day that this comes out, you might be in time for the Libra season playlist. If not, you'll get Scorpio. Doesn't matter. I love sending these things out. They're just like really fun and quick and cutesy, and we all get to catch a little vibe and move on with our lives. So if that sounds fun, you can go ahead and subscribe to my emails. That'll just give you what's up to date on all of the things. And if you don't want to do any of those things, that's fine too. I'm just really glad you're here. So thank you. I love you. So here's the conversation for today, and it's maybe going to be a little spicy. I'm not really sure where this is going to go, but we're just going to flow with it. It's something that I have been wanting to talk about on the podcast, admittedly, for a long time, and I've had it written in my notes that like this is going to be something that I talk about, but I've never quite known how to approach it. And to be honest with you, I still don't, which is why I say I'm not really sure where this is going to go, but I do have some more fleshed out notes now. I do have a little bit of research, rabbit hole type things that we could go down, and I'm ultimately excited to hear what you all have to say about this. I feel like this is a really nuanced conversation, and we might be coming at it from a different point of view than most people might. So we'll just see. You guys let me know your thoughts. I love to hear from you at any and all times. But the long story short, the core of today is a money debate. We are discussing money. And let me just say this right off the top. Me even saying that feels weird. Like, I do not associate money with wellness at all, really. And I'm going to get into kind of my background with this and where this conversation stems from for me personally. It's not really all about me, though. I just want to kind of give some context as to why this felt like it should be a conversation here. But it's interesting because being a person kind of in the wellness realm of the internet and what have you, There are a lot of weird messaging things out there about money. There are so many like money coaches. There's the whole aspect of abundance, which very quickly goes into money. There's money manifestation. There's like all of these kind of sort of woo-woo type things that relate directly to money. And I just got to be honest, from a very personal and very core view, there's not a strong connection there for me. I've never quite understood where money comes so closely in contact with general wellness. Now, again, this is a nuanced conversation. It's like, as I say that too, I know, because I'm a human and I live in a capitalistic society, I know that you have to have some amount of wealth to be well, to be able to take care of yourself, to be able to feel good about yourself and about your life. And like, I'm talking physically, actual, and I'm not talking self-care. I'm talking like actual physical care, feeding yourself, having clean water, like being able to shower, like the very basic physical necessities that you have to have some amount of wealth to be able to do. But there's a central question that I want to ask that I hope will set up today's conversation. And that is money the root of all evil, or is it an energetic tool? These are both cliches that I think many of us have seen and heard across all spheres. The homies are fighting about it. There is a debate out there. So I want to insert my opinion. Maybe it's not warranted, but we're going to talk about it anyway because I do have some strong feelings about this. More importantly, I do think there is a lot of room here for the ethos behind Lead to Gold, which is we take something that predominantly has a negative or painful or sticky hold on our lives, and we turn it into some sort of lesson or look at it as what can be learned from it. That's not to say that every single painful, awful thing that happens to us needs to be learned from. I always want to make that clear. But money is a wound for a lot of people, myself included. So how do we use that for any amount of benefit to us? How do we mend the relationship? Because I do think that is an important growth conversation to have. So let's get into it. I will start with a little bit of my upbringing and admittedly my own personal money wounds. So maybe some of those spiritual money gurus could come to my aid and be like, oh no, dear, this is why you feel this way. I'd love to hear from you. But also let me just get it out of my system, So I was born and grew up in a very affluent area. It wasn't always that way. Like when my parents were growing up, they lived right around this area as well. And back then it was nice, but it was very rural and not super affluent. So I think it was kind of a transition period from when they were young adults themselves becoming parents. As I grew up and as they also grew up, it became more of a quote unquote like rich area. In fact, even the school that I teach at now is like quote unquote stereotypically the rich school of the area. And it's just kind of interesting. Like it's always had this air. Whenever you talk about where I live, everyone's just like, oh, they assume that you come from money, that you have a lot of money, that you've just kind of been set for life. When you drive around, there's McMansions everywhere. There are 3-car garage houses everywhere, private pools, golf courses, all of the stuff. It's all over the place. Cost of living is pretty crazy. It's an affluent area, as I said. But as I was growing up, I was not really a part of that. So even though I lived in a very wealthy area and definitely experienced a lot of the privilege that comes with that, my family was not wealthy. In fact, when the recession hit, I was probably 10 or 11 around that time. It hit hard for us. Like it was not fun, not a good time. I remember my mom taking us back to school shopping one year, and she got a bill in the mail or something after the fact, and she showed me how much money it was. Now, granted, I was young, so that amount of money looked like a lot of money to me at the time. And she was explaining how, she had to pay it off. And that was all from our back to school shopping. And it kind of, put a pretty significant dent in her finances, where then I was like, oh my God, like that's a really big deal. We don't have money to like buy clothes. And I know that that wasn't her intention in telling me that, but it felt that way to me. Like, and I could feel the stress coming from her, which worried me deeply. Like I was like, oh, we don't have enough money for things like this. Like I shouldn't ask for things like this. And I remember also her feeling so guilty for not being able to feed us like good meals for a while. There was just so much. Being really upset a lot because my parents would kind of like hide away to have it out about money and or fight about money and or cry about money. And it was just a really tender pain in the like fabric of my family, I suppose. And I feel kind of over dramatic even saying it that way, but it is something that sticks with me a lot, to the point where I got older, and even when things did get better, I still kept a lot of wounding around the issue of money. I remember going to college and having frequent maladaptive fantasies of the day that I would be out on my own and completely drowning in financial woes, because I just was so scared that because of the upbringing that I had and because of all of the difficulties that my parents had with money and the stresses that they had around it, I just was like, there's no way that I'm going to be ready to handle that on my own. And I was so scared of just being like broke forever and not being able to keep my head above water. It was a huge, huge fear. Huge. So all of that to say, I'm so fortunate, and I am so like beyond, I literally talk about this with my partner all the time, but I genuinely still cannot believe the amount of financial freedom that I have now. And it's not to say that I'm wealthy by any means, but I'm comfortable, and that's more than I ever saw my parents be or feel, even to this day. It's more than I ever expected for myself, and I still am beside myself that this is reality. So we made it out, I suppose. I'm still very young. Anything could change at any time, but I'm in a good position. I still have a lot of wounds around money. Just the other day, I was going through Instagram and I saw, and this is not by any means the first time I've seen it, but it's the last time I remember having a strong reaction to it. I was scrolling through stories, and a woman that I follow had said something about, I only work a few hours a day, that's it, because my content makes the money for me. And you could be the same way. You don't have to work an 8-hour job. You don't have to work a 9 to 5. You don't have to work 5 days a week. You can do the same thing as me and make 10 times the amount that you currently do. That wasn't the exact message, but it's those kinds of messages that I see all the time. And I know I'm not the only one. And it's even more pointed to this conversation. It's messages like that that still honestly boil my blood. Like I get so viscerally angry when I see people putting things like that out on the internet, because my initial reaction is, how dare you try to tell any person out there that they can make a reel and profit more than they already are. It's not that simple. And then this is where it gets complicated. This is where we're getting into the nuance of this conversation. Then I check myself and I go, but who am I to say that? Because I'm not an official content creator. I don't profit off of my content. Who am I to say how easy or hard it is? I don't really know. I don't live that life. But this is the core of one side of this debate. I don't think it's an overreaction to see things like this and get upset because, again, like I said, it's not that simple for most people. But even deeper than that, I know people besides myself have a lot of wounding around money. It is not just a personal, individual wound, it is a cultural, collective wound. I want to begin this with a little blip that I saw. I'm not going to go into the article that I saw this on, but a recent study showed that something like 45% of Americans report significant stress around money. So that in and of itself can tell you it's basically every other person you know is often or always stressed about their finances. To me, that's number one. That's something that we have to keep in mind, is that this is a wound. This is something that comes up for a lot of people a lot of the time. An article that I will share with you from 2017 is called Money Controls Our Lives. It's time to rethink our relationship with the almighty dollar. I'll link it in the show notes for you. But I really like it. It's talking a lot about the domination of financial practices and honestly just in general capitalism in our society and how that affects us. So the person who writes this says, to me, it seems that the more interconnected the world becomes, the more power is held over individuals and nations by economics, money, and flows of finance. In so many human crises, money plays a part. It is treated as both the problem and the solution. The problem with materialism is not that it exists, but that it dominates. It shouts so loudly that it overrides our caring about other things. This is demonstrated particularly in how we measure things and ascribe value. If we can't measure something, then there is a tendency not to value it as much as something that is easily measurable. That is a key point that I want to come back to later in this conversation. But really quick, another little tidbit that I would like to get into is from another article from the Huffington Post originally. Whether the term affluenza, a portmanteau of affluence and influenza, is real or imagined, money really does change everything. And those of a high social class do tend to see themselves much differently than others. Wealth and the pursuit of it has been linked with immoral behavior, and not just in movies like The Wolf of Wall Street. Several studies have shown that wealth may be at odds with empathy and compassion, which might not really come as a surprise to a lot of us. Research published in the Journal of Psychological Science found that people of lower economic status were better at reading others' facial expressions, an important marker of empathy, than wealthier people. Another study suggested that merely thinking about money could lead to unethical behavior. Researchers from Harvard and the University of Utah found that study participants were more likely to lie or behave immorally after being exposed to money-related words. And finally, the pursuit of wealth itself can also become a compulsive behavior. As psychologist Dr. Tian Dayton explained, a compulsive need to acquire money is often considered part of a class of behaviors known as process addictions or behavioral addictions. While the process addiction is not a chemical addiction, it does involve compulsive behavior. In this case, an addiction to the good feeling that comes from receiving money, which can ultimately lead to negative consequences and harm the individual's well-being. So in a way, although having some amount of wealth can be beneficial for your wellness, having too much or caring too much about how much wealth you can accrue is not so great for our overall wellness. There you have it. The science says it. It also just seems kind of obvious to me in a way, because there are a lot of examples, and maybe this is just kind of our sensationalism and a little bit, to be honest, of like underlying racism, where we look at third world countries or people who are more or less impoverished, don't have a lot of resources. And again, these are just things that I have seen on the internet, but it's a very common trope to be like, wow, look at these poor people who are just so grateful for the little things in life. And it'll be a video of like children in a village dancing together or something. So I know that that's also a very, very large generalization, but it is a trope that we still hold on to. Not having a lot of wealth makes you more humble. It makes you more satisfied and more grateful for the smaller things in life, the simple joys, whatever you want to call it. And there is definitely some sort of fantasy a lot of us might experience or know where we kind of yearn to go back to that kind of life, whatever that means. It's a very weird tug of war kind of situation with the capitalism that we live under. There's a lot of nuance just within that one conversation that I don't really want to get into for today's conversation, but I'll just leave it at there are reasons why we might see a random video on the internet and think, oh, wow, those people look so happy and so joyous with so little. But when we really think about the implications of being an impoverished person living under a capitalist state, things get a lot more serious and a lot more dire for people that can't afford to live in those conditions. And it's very real, again, where I might have a little bit of wounding around this subject. But let's talk about healing those wounds, shall we? Let's talk about the flip side of this conversation, the one that tends to get a little bit more loud in wellness spaces, the one that promises, and guys, I might be showing my bias a little bit here. I'm not saying there's a correct answer to this, but the ones that promise that you can heal your relationship to money, you can heal your money wounds, and you can build wealth by manifesting, by thinking about it differently. There's a lot of different messages that I've seen around this subject. So weirdly, not really a research thing, but it's something that stuck with me. I wanted to read you guys a screenshot of a story that I kept specifically because it did stick with me and I thought it was well worded, even though I don't necessarily 100% agree with it. So there's kind of two parts to this. For reference, I don't have the person's @ saved, so I don't want to misspeak and attribute this to somebody that it might not be, but the person who I think it was is a model and Instagram businesswoman for like holistic tinctures. Very hippie. We love it. Very aesthetic. Anyway, a person responded to a previous story that she had posted and said, "Hi, please don't get me wrong. I love you and everything you share. I just feel like sharing this. Recently, it just makes me kind of sad and confused to see everyone is making business out of spiritual / helping people stuff. I wish you, and in fact, I wish for all of us, wealth and abundance in all areas of life. It just makes me feel not okay when I think about people, women that would need this knowledge and help the most, but have not the resources at the moment. I want all the best for all of us. Sometimes I just feel like this kind of money chasing is creating a feeling of separation. I don't know. Maybe I get it wrong. Again, love you and thank you." So this was a very kind-hearted message, and I think they bring up a good point. A lot of people do monetize the wellness space. I have talked at length in previous episodes about the wellness industry versus what wellness truly at its core is meant to be. But that's not entirely the point of me sharing this. I wanted to share this person's response. I want to address this one here because I think this is an important subject. Service starts with prosperity, not poverty. You know how difficult it is to be of service to people when you don't have the resources to do so. Money and wealth are such an incredible tool. When I share about wanting to build and scale my business, it's coming from a place of wanting to help and support as many women as possible, with both free resources and paid ones. But in order for me to do this work, I can't do it for free completely. That would require me to take on another job and not put my 100% into this mission. I find this mission too important to not do that. My intention for this company is rooted in being of service to you all always. Lastly, women making an abundance of money is so needed. Being a woman who builds a feminine-led business and creates a prosperous income for herself on her own pace through her cyclical nature is something I want to normalize. We live in a masculine-driven world that has taught women to neglect their own clock in order to be successful. Changing the narrative is so necessary for the revolution of women reclaiming their feminine power. Is she wrong on that front? I certainly don't think so. I love the sentiment of helping women build wealth. I love it. We do need to see more of it. We do need to have more equality in the space of making money. That said, I do think, and I'm not arguing with her specifically, but I do think that although it is important, the conversation of women making equal pay to men is a separate conversation. I think the more important conversation to be having is why we are all so obsessed with wealth. And there's a pretty clear answer for that. It is that you can't really get by in this life without some amount of wealth, unless you completely live off the grid and unsubscribe from every societal norm that we have. But if you want to live under the collective society, the collective culture, if you want to be a part of the system, quote unquote, I feel like I want to barf just saying that, you need some amount of wealth. Why are we so obsessed with it? Why do we need it, actually, is the better question. It's capitalism. We can't afford the lifestyles that we're told we should have and the ones that we should strive for if we are not wealthy to some degree. That's why there are so many money coaches out there nowadays, and there are so many different brands of wellness coaches. I tend to see more of the side of like manifesting your wealth, focusing on abundance in your meditations. Even really big league people like Deepak Chopra focus very heavily on material wealth in their meditations. There's a very popular trope of money being a spiritual energy. Money is currency, yes, obviously, but it is also an energetic currency. It's an exchange. I've heard it said so many ways. And oftentimes in these meditations or in these practices where you might want to change your relationship to money, which, by the way, are usually targeted toward people who are extremely stressed out about their money, they might ask if you've ever considered that money is often seen, yes, as a material necessity, but it's actually, again, a form of spiritual energy. This may seem like a strange or even provocative question, but what if we were to shift our perspective and to see money not as a physical entity, but as energetic flow? Imagine if we were able to see money not as something to be hoarded or feared, but as life force, as something that kind of ebbs and flows. It connects us all in a very intricate web. What if our relationship with money could transcend beyond the physical? Interesting, no? I hate to say it. I'm really not trying to call out my money gurus. I know they have good intentions, some of them maybe, but this to me is the highest form of spiritual lingo that doesn't really mean anything. It just kind of gets people sucked into what you're trying to sell them. Because here's the catch. People that, even though I love their other work, I've seen this so much where they say, okay, I have sold programs. I have sold coaching bundles. I have sold internet products. I have sold things to people and made a good amount of wealth. And because I have done that, I now feel that I can teach other people how to do it. This is, I don't want to say it's a tale as old as time, but it is a tale as old as TikTok. There we go. I like that. I'm going to use that as a catchphrase. A tale as old as TikTok, where these people will say, look how much money I made selling this thing. I'm going to teach you how to do it too. And then it's basically just a thing where you pay however much money to go to a Zoom call. They teach you how to make an online program or a quick online ebook and then tell you to sell it. And guess what? Chances are you're not going to make as much money as them because you don't have as big a following as them. It is a tale as old as TikTok. I'm going to keep saying it because I really like it. And that just came from the brain, came from the old noggin. What I'm establishing in talking about the many different sides of the conversations that are had around money, especially now in such a volatile capitalistic society. And I know I keep saying the word. I'm not trying to make it sound like a buzzword. It just is. That's where we are. We are in late stage capitalism. We are under a system that is detrimental to many people, and money is the direct cause. Notice I'm not saying that money is the root of all evil, but money is the reason that so many people suffer and that so few can make it to the top. Truly, I have to step back from this conversation and realize that the people who are spouting these things about how money is a tool, money is a luxury, it's abundance, all you have to do is manifest it. I don't want to go as far as to say that all of these people have always had everything handed to them. I think that's way too much of a generalization. But what I will say is, I'll bring it back to that article that we kind of shared a couple minutes ago, where people who are wealthier or who have amassed wealth begin to not really think about what it's like when they discuss their money situation and try to share that and like kind of give that knowledge to people who are not there yet. They don't necessarily realize that it's not that simple, that just because they did it doesn't necessarily mean anyone can do it. It's not that simple. It's just not. There's a lot of nuance in the way that people amass wealth, in the way that people get lucky. It's just not that simple. And there's no way to sell it. And well, no, that's not true. There is definitely a way to sell it, but there's not a way to guarantee it, is what I should say. Which brings me to kind of this end piece of the money conversation. Maybe not the end, but like something that I didn't really go into this conversation or into this episode realizing there is a way to feel. There is a middle ground. There is a way to relate to money coming from a place where money was a huge pain point, but not going so far as to say, now that I have amassed some wealth, it's possible for everybody, and money is an energetic tool, and it's amazing, and it's beautiful, and it's abundant, and I love it. Because truthfully, I don't feel that way. I just never have. In fact, as I've said many times now, I get really triggered when people say that and when people act that way and try to get others to buy into that idea. There is a middle ground. And I'm going to read us a little bit from a Forbes article that kind of uses, at the beginning, some of the same lingo as these money coaches, if you will, on Instagram. Money is a tool. So stop treating it as the goal. I want more money. I need to save more money. I wish I had more money. We hear these phrases all the time, and I might be guilty of saying them too. While it's natural to think this way, doing so only creates more stress around money. When we look at more money as the ultimate goal, we will never feel satisfied that we have enough. However, when viewed as a means to an end, we realize that we can afford anything. How is that? Money is everywhere in this society. It's a fact, not a judgment. It helps us function daily. Whether you use it to pay your mortgage or to cover your commuting expenses, money is essential. We also want to have those nice to have elements like travel and a social life, which requires more money. So it's not surprising that we focus on money all the time. I'm adding in here. Capitalism, people. Capitalism. I've never met anyone who can't generate a list of things in which they would spend money on if provided the means to do so. From this standpoint, it's logical to think that we must need more money to live a fulfilling life. The challenge we face is actually wrapping our mind around the concept of quote unquote more money. What does that mean? And how do we know when we achieve more? Dream with me for a minute. I'm like reading this whole article because it's good. I like it. Step outside your current financial circumstances and make a list of what you would do with $100 million this week. The amount is arbitrary. The point is to picture a specific yet tough to fathom amount. Okay, so I'm going to pause here. I'm going to just say, I've thought about this many times. I'm sure many of us have. If I had $100 million this week, you know the first thing I'm going to do, which is probably what a lot of people would say, I'm going to finish paying off my fucking loans. I don't have that much left, but I'm going to finish paying those off. I'm probably going to give some to my family. I'm going to probably go on a little shopping spree, and then I'm not even engaged yet, you guys, but I'm going to save it up for like the most insanely beautiful wedding anybody has ever seen. That's literally it. That's what I'm doing. Not with all of it. Maybe I'll have some left over. Maybe I'll move. Maybe I'll buy a nice house. I don't know. That's what I'm doing. Okay. Let's continue. Make another list of what you would do with an additional $100 million next week. How about the week after? The point of this exercise is to help us clear our minds of the material items and instant gratification experiences that clutter our thinking when we view the world with a finite money supply. Eventually, we will exhaust our list of what we want, which leaves us free to focus on the things that we are actually committed to in our lives. Once we have everything we think we need, we begin to focus on what matters to us. We focus on those things that give us the utmost satisfaction and leave us feeling content. And yes, we can actually feel this way. So it's interesting, right? Because I listed off all of those things that I would do with $100 million in a week. And that's nowhere near going to spend $100 million. There's just no way. So after that, what is there left to do? Well, I don't know. After you purchase all the things, after you buy your dream house or remodel the house you're currently in, after you pay everything off, after you buy all the things that you could ever possibly want, what is there left to do? When does money stop being such an important thing in our lives? When does it stop being the thing that we all have to strive for more of? Which, again, kind of feeds into our capitalistic mindset. There's always more to attain. There's always more to strive for, to earn, to collect, to hoard. When does it stop? And this is maybe kind of similar to the idea that I was bringing up earlier, but the ending of that article that I just read, the whole thing about eventually you start to come back to just simple satisfaction, and it is possible to feel that way. It reminds me of something that my grandma used to say, where her family and her lineage, I suppose, was always poor, but they were happy. Like, they made things work. And I think in and of itself, that's kind of a privileged statement, but I do think there's also some truth to it. They were poor. They didn't have a lot. They didn't amass wealth the way that we understand it, but they were happy with their lives. And I do think that that is also possible. It's harder to do, especially now, but it is possible. I don't know. It all gets so nuanced. It's all very dependent on the individual's perspective and opinion about how money affects their well-being and the well-being of people around them. It's a very interesting dichotomy. There's so many directions that we could take this, but I do want to kind of just end the whole debate on that middle ground. There really is a middle ground. We can just look at money as a neutral. It's just a thing that we have. That's it. What's more important to remember is the mindset from the beginning of this episode, where we place value on things that are actually important to us. Kind of tying in two ideas together here. Eventually, when money stops being the thing that we need, we can start thinking again about other things. This is obviously a lot easier said than done, and there are a lot of different situations out there in which this is just not reality right now, and there's no judgment to those people that feel that way. None at all. But I think the ultimate goal is to find a way to take so much emphasis off of money. That is a societal issue. That is not an individual's issue. That is a collective thing that we need to work on. But when we were talking about valuing other things in our lives, money becomes so valuable and so important to us because it is measurable, whereas love or quality relationships are not exactly measurable. You can't count it by numbers. You can't quantify how much you like your job or how happy you are in your relationship or the joy with which you get out of your hobbies. So those are the things that become over time less valuable because they are harder to value numerically. I don't know if that's entirely sensical, but that's how I interpret that little tidbit that we talked about at the beginning. So this leads me to a final question, something that I think gets again to the core of what we're talking about here, which is, can there exist a culture where we can prioritize people and profit? Is there a system that we can live under where money is used and is, I don't want to say prioritized, but like respected, but not overwhelmingly so to the point that people become addicted to it. It becomes a huge source of stress and inequality. Is there a way that we can live in a world where money is just a thing? So I looked into this a little bit. Honestly, didn't find a whole lot. There is a concept of a philosophy called a conscious capitalistic company or something like that. Conscious capitalism, I think is what it is. And I started looking into it. It was honestly a very generic and very basic philosophy of just like treating your employees well. But the further I got into it, I realized that there are something like 3,500 companies with a registered or like certified conscious capitalism label, whatever that's actually called. I looked at the list of some of the most popular companies and Starbucks is among them. So that immediately raised a red flag for me, because if you know anything about the Starbucks scandals that have happened over the past several years, they are known to fire employees who get involved in labor unions. So that just doesn't sit right with me. Anyway, all of that to say, I didn't really find a whole lot of like valid evidence of this being a practice, but I do know of some companies that do try their hardest to make their business model work for their employees. And more importantly than the business itself, it often helps the people that work under it, and therefore the people kind of have a ripple effect on how we perceive money as a collective. I'll end it on this note though, because I know that this is not impossible. I know that there are few and far between, but there are lots of companies out there that really, really do seek to treat their customers and their employees alike with fairness and with a people first mindset over profit. One that just immediately comes to mind, and I know y'all who are not like spiritual girlies are going to come for me, but it's the first one that comes to mind because I was looking at this recently, is Chani. And if you don't know who Chani Nicholas is, she is like the big league astrologer right now, but she has a company for app development. Like she has a really big app and a lot of other kind of like marketing tactics for her work. I think the largest aspect of it is the app. She has a lot of development into it. And I was listening to a podcast that featured her where she was discussing all of the benefits that her employees get. They get unlimited sick leave. They get unlimited vacation and all of these other benefits that I'm not going to remember off the top of my head right now that sound too good to be true. Just even for somebody like me who is all about workers' rights and having more time off and like the 3-day weekend, all of that. I'm like so pro everything. Let's just all work a little bit less. So even for somebody like me, right? A lot of the things that I was hearing her talk about, I'm like, there's no way. There's no way that you can afford to give your employees all of these benefits without losing money, without being in debt from all of this. And again, I am not going to remember the exact conversation, but I will absolutely link it in the show notes because I loved hearing her talk about this. The bottom line, and I know we've heard this before, is just that if you treat your people well, they're going to stick around. If you treat your people well, if you compensate them well, if you allow them to take time off when they need time off, they're going to stick around. And I'm not an economist, which is another reason why I didn't really super want to have this conversation in the first place, because I was getting some imposter syndrome around it. I didn't feel qualified enough to talk about it. Nonetheless, it just makes sense to me that having a good business model, aka one where you actually genuinely care about the people who work for you, you're gonna have, in the long run, a better, more profitable business, because you're treating people with basic human decency. And that is more important to me, and I think to most people, than money in and of itself could ever possibly be. I don't know. Maybe I'm getting a little wackadoodle here. Maybe I'm a little bit misguided, but I genuinely think that part of the misguidedness that we get into with this entire money debate is how much emphasis and how much importance we put around a thing that is kind of, in a way, not real. I mean, it is, but it is just, at the end of the day, a tool, as we've said. We give it so much power. We give it so much energy. We give it so much anxiety. And at the end of the day, it's just a thing. But we, people, amidst other people, are like living, breathing, moving about, trying to do our best. We have emotions. We have purpose. We are alive. And I think that sometimes we put things above that shouldn't be above that. Does that make sense? I don't know. There is no one answer. There is no one way to feel. Even for myself, I know I'm going to walk away from this conversation and feel differently about it day to day. But the one thing that I might just leave us with as far as the money debate is to not give so much attention to it. I know that that is hard for some people, especially if you are either coming from a place of financial instability or are currently experiencing it. I will still get triggered by the money coaches on Instagram. I know I will, because it's infuriating at the end of the day for me. Should it be? Does this mean that I need to, quote unquote, work through my money wounds? Does this mean that I need to right my relationship to money? Which, by the way, was originally like the thing I wanted to try to like get into for this episode. But then I stepped back and I was like, no, because that's not me and that's not my experience. And I don't believe that it's even necessarily a natural thing to expect every person to be able to, quote unquote, right their relationship to money. Money is hard. Money is tricky. It gives us icky, sticky feelings. And I think there's a big, obvious reason for that, some of which we've already discussed. So I won't go back into it. But one thing I don't think I've quite yet said, which I do think is a positive movement in the past couple of years, decades, somewhere in there, is that we are seemingly getting a little bit more comfortable sharing about our money wounds, just like I'm doing right now, but not just here. I'm talking more along the lines of being more open with coworkers about how much you're making, to discover if there is any inequality in that specific workplace, or being comfortable enough to talk about issues with debt with friends. There's still, and again, I'm like feeling another kind of separate wound come up with this. There's that expectation that you don't want to give anybody, no matter how close they are to you, any private information, especially about your finances, because that could leave you vulnerable. And I don't think that's entirely untrue. However, I do think we've been a little bit misguided in that way. Maybe our parents were forced that belief down their throats, so they grew up thinking they could never, ever, ever discuss money, only to find that most of the time nothing's going to happen. In fact, it's probably a good thing to be able to discuss, because what if you are making 20% less than the guy in the cubicle next to you that makes the exact or does the exact same job as you? It'd be nice to know that, wouldn't it? So I do think it's nice that we are more able nowadays to have more open conversations about our own finances and finance in general, and maybe even a little bit of the evils of money. What that does, I believe, is kind of breaks down that big scary wall that we have over the concept of money and finances and capitalism. Being able to talk about it, just like being able to talk about a really deep, scary anxiety that you might feel, maybe something that feels like it's too big or too scary to share with other people. When you finally do, that dissipates like half of the anxiety, just being able to voice it. And I do think that that's also true with our relationship to money. So I don't know. Maybe that's a little light at the end of the tunnel. Maybe our being able to actually have conversations around this is of mutual benefit. I won't say much more because truthfully, I don't know much more. What I would love to know is how you all feel about this, and if there are any other little tidbits that you might want to throw into this conversation. Absolutely let me know over on Instagram, or you can send me an email. Again, all the links are all in the show notes. So reach out if you want to. I love this conversation. Glad I finally had it. So thanks for giving me the space to do so. Let's finish up today's episode with our usual little game of We're Not Really Strangers. And right here, if you have a journal nearby and you want to just kind of jot down your thoughts to this question, it may have nothing to do with what we've talked about today, especially since this is a game focused on healing. And we haven't really talked much about like mental healing in this episode, but let's see. Let's just see what we get. Okay. Here's the question for today. What's a boundary you can set with yourself today that will benefit future you? Okay. This is where I was going to say I might end up talking about this whole little Facebook thing. And I'm going to talk about this whole little Facebook thing because something that I knew would come up the more I tried to promote some of my blog and podcast stuff. I knew that I would eventually get some negative feedback because that is the nature of the internet. That is the nature of sharing your beliefs online with strangers. It's bound to happen. People aren't going to agree with you. That should not ever stop you from sharing the things. But at the same time, it's terrifying to get that negative feedback for the first time. So just this past couple of days, actually, I posted and boosted my most recent blog post, which was pretty hefty. It was kind of political and it involved school shootings because I'm a teacher. So this is something that's very hyper relevant for me right now. There was a recent event pretty close to my district that kind of had a ripple effect to nearby districts. So it was just on the top of my mind and I was feeling heavy about it. So I felt the need to write about it. And some of the feedback that I got was, again, not so positive. A lot of people were calling it like overly emotional or just like blatantly wrong. And my initial reaction to seeing any negative comment is like hot face, nervousness, like panic a little bit for a second because I'm like, fuck, like, somebody's upset at what I said. I shouldn't have said it. Oh God, maybe I should delete the whole post. But then I was proud of myself this time around because I didn't quite get that far. I was like, you know what? This person doesn't know me. They couldn't pretend to know me. They're probably not an educator. They are very far removed from the world that I live in, and I don't really need that energy. So I'm going to delete this comment because it doesn't serve me and it doesn't serve the community who's with me. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Maybe some people do. Maybe some people would see that as unfair, like you're silencing someone, but I just don't want that on my page, to be quite honest with you. So I'm going to delete your comment. Thanks for sending it. Thanks for reading. Sorry you didn't like it, I guess, but at the end of the day, it is a blog and it is my opinion. So bye. That's my boundary. And that's something that I hope to uphold as long as I continue to have a public facing platform. So that's my boundary. How about you? What is a boundary that you could set for yourself that would benefit future you? Let me know. Or don't. Keep it to yourself. Write it down in your journal. Send it out into the universe. Let it be known. Let it be heard. And I wish you all the best of luck with that. Thank you so much for joining for yet another episode of Led to Gold. Yet another week. I know we're winding down, but I so appreciate you being here and listening along, joining in on the conversation. And I look forward to wrapping up this little season with you guys. So see you back here in 2 more weeks or on the blog if you are interested. I love you so, so much. We'll talk soon. Bye.